July 2nd, 1942. Black waters of the Solomon Islands, just off Tulagi. The night sky was ink black, pierced only by a cluster of stars and the faint glow of distant flares. Waves slapped against the sleek wooden hull of PT-109, a patrol torpedo boat barely 80 feet long, its twin 12-cylinder pack of engines humming in measured rhythm. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy stood on the deck, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the horizon for the flicker of Japanese destroyers. The air was thick with salt and anticipation. Every sense was taut. Around him, the small crew of 12 moved with quiet efficiency, each man knowing that the ocean could turn from serene to lethal in seconds. Petty Officer George Ross adjusted a radar receiver, static hissing in the earpiece, Walston and Thomas sat in a checked torpedo tubes, the polished metal gleaming under the moonlight. These boats were laughably small, wooden-hulled, and almost fragile. In naval circles back in Washington, Japanese commanders and even some skeptical American officers had dismissed them as nothing more than Mosquito fleets too puny to stand a chance against armored cruisers or battleships. Kennedy lowered the binoculars, his dark eyes reflecting both calculation and determination. "Remember, men," he said softly but firmly, "they may call us toys, they may laugh at us, but tonight we change the game." The waves rocked PT-109, slamming the hull against unseen current. The sonar technician, Simon Leonard, called out numbers, translating the faint echoes bouncing off distant hulls into tangible information. The crew listened as the ocean whispered its secrets. Every ripple, every shadow mattered. Hours earlier, the intelligence brief had been grim. The Japanese were reinforcing Guadalcanal with a convoy of destroyers, unaware that these tiny craft were lying in wait. The plan was bold reckless even, but boldness was the PT boat's only weapon besides speed, stealth, and the element of surprise. The engines purred, the radar blinked, and the night pressed down like a heavy velvet curtain. Suddenly, Ross whispered, "Contact, bearing 050, 2 miles. His finger traced the outline of a faint silhouette against the night horizon. Kennedy scanned it through binoculars. Faint starlight glinted off a large hull one of the destroyers from the Japanese reinforcement convoy. The vessel was massive in comparison to PT-109, steel-skinned, bristling with gun turrets. Hittner grinned despite the tension. "Looks like they didn't expect a Mosquito tonight." Kennedy nodded, signaling the engines to throttle down. They needed silence. Noise was betrayal in the Solomon's black waters. The destroyer S-lights bobbed, unaware of the tiny shadow weaving closer. For months, Japanese officers had mocked PT boats and intercepted communications, labeling them inconsequential, toys meant for crucial harassment. Now, these toys were the hunters. Aboard PT-109, torpedoes hummed in their tubes, ready. The wooden deck creaked slightly under the weight of anticipation. Kennedy could feel the power beneath his hands, the fragile bow straining as though it knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. The radar registered faint pings, 3 more destroyers shadowing the main target, each one larger than PT-109 by multiples. "Hold steady," Kennedy murmured, gripping the throttle. "Wait for the right moment." Minutes stretched like hours. The water surface shimmered under the moon, each wave a potential enemy or ally. The Japanese destroyer moved closer to the convoy, confident in its size and firepower. There was a momentary silence that was almost unnatural. No wind, no distant artillery, only the soft lap of water and the heartbeat of the men. Kennedy recalled what his instructors at the motor torpedo boat squadron had drilled into them: speed, coordination, stealth. Never confront a battleship head-on. Strike, then vanish. Hit and retreat. The world above the waves had underestimated them, and this night would prove the cost of the arrogance. 200 yards, Ross said, tension tightening his voice. Kennedy's hands moved instinctively. The torpedo tubes primed. The crew held their collective breath. The destroyer, unaware of its tiny nemesis, continued along its predictable path. A calculated moment, a fraction of a second, was all that separated opportunity from disaster. "Fire," Kennedy whispered. A torpedo hissed into the black water, the faint trail of bubbles marking a steady path. The destroyer S-bow loomed closer, massive and indifferent, but the torpedo ran straight true. The seconds stretched, and then the explosion ripped through the night, a deafening roar of steel, fire, and water. The destroyer shuddered violently, flames leaping across its deck. PT-109 jolted from the shockwave, wooden hull trembling. The crew erupted into exhilarated shouting, but Kennedy's face remained focused, scanning for threats. Around them, the water churned, smoke and fire rising from the sinking target. Other Japanese ships scrambled, guns firing blindly into the dark, while the PT boat melted into shadow, engines screaming, disappearing like a ghost among waves. Hitler's laugh finally broke through. Did you see their faces? They actually believed we were nothing. Kennedy allowed a faint smile, but his mind was already moving to the next target, the next calculated strike. The Japanese had laughed at them, dismissed them, even mocked their wooden hulls and small size. Tonight, that laughter had turned into chaos. Their Mosquito fleet had bitten, and the ocean itself seemed to hum with vindication. Minutes later, PT-109 slipped into the darkness, invisible again, leaving behind the destroyer crippled, smoke trailing into the Solomon's night sky. The crew of 12, adrenaline still racing, knew this was only the beginning. Stories would be told, reports filed, and Japanese officers would awake to the realization that these small, fast boats were lethal forces the size of which no one had fully appreciated. For Lieutenant Kennedy and his crew, the night had proven one immutable truth: underestimation was a weapon, and stealth, courage, and audacity could turn the tiniest boat into terror against giants. The Pacific War was vast, brutal, and relentless, but in the shadows, the PT boats waited fast, small, and deadly. The enemy's laughter had turned to disbelief, and the balance of power had subtly shifted in favor of those who dared to strike against overwhelming odds. PT-109 cut through the dark water like a silent predator, the stars mirrored by the scattered lights of distant islands. Each man aboard new history had been made in these ways an improbable victory, born from the audacity of a wooden boat and the courage of its crew. March 12, 1942. Melville, Rhode Island. The sun glinted harshly off the water of the naval torpedo station, bouncing across rows of wooden PT boats bobbing gently at their moorings. Inside the base, the air smelled of diesel, varnish, and freshly sanded wood. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy, freshly commissioned and assigned to motor torpedo boat Squadron 2, strode along the dock, notebook clutched in one hand, while the faint roar of engines filled the background, a mechanical symphony of promise and potential chaos. Kennedy scanned the boats, each barely more than 80 feet of polished mahogany, engines exposed, and gun mounts gleaming. The brass fittings caught the sun like scattered sparks. The instructors at the base were pragmatic, almost dismissive. They refast, one officer said, but fragile. You'll be fired upon by destroyers, cruisers, maybe even aircraft. Remember, these boats aren't meant to win head-on fights. They're for harassment, torpedo runs, and intelligence. Kennedy nodded, already imagining the possibilities. Speed, stealth, and surprise. He understood the value of audacity in warfare, and he sensed the Navy had underestimated these tiny vessels, as the Japanese would soon learn. But first, the training. Every maneuver, every torpedo launch, every evasive action would need to be drilled to perfection, because in the Pacific, mistakes could be fatal. Petty Officer George Ross guided Kennedy toward the PT-109, the hull freshly varnished and smelling faintly of pine tar. Lieutenant, Ross said, you'll be learning how to run this boat like it is an extension of your own body. You make a mistake out there, a destroyer Escunders and take care if you renew green. Kennedy's grin was tight, but confident. I didn't sign up to be ignored, Ross. Let us see how fast this Mosquito can bite. Over the next several weeks, PT crews trained relentlessly. They navigated treacherous coastal waters, practiced night attacks, and launched torpedoes at floating targets. Kennedy and his men learned to read the subtle language of the ocean wave patterns, wind shifts, the faint ripple of an unseen hull. They practiced silent approaches, throttling back engines to a whisper, hugging shadows, and mastering the art of the unexpected. The Japanese had dismissed these boats as minor nuisances, Mosquito fleets incapable of altering battles. But the Americans knew differently. Every night in the Rhode Island bays, under the cover of darkness, the PT boats grew more formidable. The small size was an advantage, allowing them to slip past radar and evade the bulk of the enemy's firepower. Wooden hulls, once considered a weakness, made them nearly invisible to sonar. And torpedoes, though small, could cripple ships 10 times their size. Lieutenant Kennedy quickly became adept at commanding PT boats. He learned the subtle physics of each curve, the torque of the twin Packard engines, and the precise timing for torpedo launches. Petty Officer Ross and Seaman Hittner were no less dedicated, their focus honed by countless drills. The crew practiced night maneuvers in formation, approaching dummy targets silently and retreating before a single flare could betray their position. But training was not just about mechanics. It was about cultivating an instinct for unpredictability, an intuitive understanding of the ocean-esque precious nature. Kennedy often reminded his men, the Japanese expect us to be conventional. We'll be anything but that. As the weeks passed, the PT boasts small victories and simulated attacks built confidence. Crews grew bold, inventing creative approaches to evade detection, timing torpedo launches with precision, and learning to use darkness as an ally. The instructors noted the PT boat's potential, yet some remained skeptical. The LL never survived a night against real destroyers, one muttered during an observation. Kennedy overheard the comment, smiling quietly. He didn't need them to believe. History favored those who acted decisively, not those who hedged on the opinion of others. By late April, the squadron shifted out toward the Pacific, the wooden hulls now seasoned by training, their crews tested under simulated fire, and their tactics refined in shadowed harbors. The Japanese, thousands of miles away, were unaware that this Mosquito fleet would soon become their most feared nightmare. The journey across the ocean was long, giving Kennedy and his crew time to bond and finalize strategies. Nights were spent scanning the horizon for enemy movement, days adjusting engines, checking torpedo alignment, and studying maps of the Solomon Islands. Each island, each reef, each hidden cove was logged meticulously. Intelligence briefings warned of Japanese destroyers, patrol boats, and aircraft enemies larger, stronger, and better armored than any PT boat. Yet the Americans knew that speed, stealth, and audacity could equalize the playing field. On board PT-109, Kennedy would often stand at the boat, binoculars in hand, imagining the night ahead when these lessons would matter. Remember, he told his crew, the ocean doesn't care about size, it only rewards courage and precision. If we strike smart, we win. Petty Officer Ross laughed softly. Mosquitoes with a bite. Exactly, Kennedy replied. In a bite I'll never forget. By the time the PT boats reached their first forward operating area in the Solomons, their crews were ready not just to navigate treacherous waters, but to redefine what the world thought possible for such small, underestimated vessels. They carried with them the weight of the Navy's doubts, the enemy's mockery, and the hopes of countless sailors who believed that audacity could triumph over brute force. Night fell over the Pacific once more, and in the darkness, the PT boats waited ready to prove that even the smallest ship could make history. August 1st, 1942. Longa Point, Guadalcanal. The humid air was thick with the scent of salt, tropical foliage, and the faint acrid tan of distant fires burning on the shore. PT-109 bobbed lightly against the wake of larger vessels, engines idling as Lieutenant John F. Kennedy peered through binoculars. The Solomon Islands lay shrouded in darkness, only the dim glow of Japanese ships' navigation lights piercing the horizon. The night was alive with the quiet pulse of anticipation. Kennedy's crew Petty Officer George Ross, Seaman Thomas Hittner, Seaman Leonard, and the others moved silently about the deck. Each man knew the stakes. Their target was a Japanese destroyer convoy delivering troops and supplies to the Imperial forces holding Guadalcanal. Intelligence reports had indicated heavy enemy presence, and yet the PT boats were the only craft capable of engaging the enemy in these narrow waters without drawing overwhelming firepower. The Japanese had dismissed the PTs as nuisances, inconsequential Mosquito fleets unworthy of serious consideration. They laughed at the idea that wooden boats, 8 times smaller than their destroyers, could disrupt supply lines or threaten capital ships. That ignorance, Kennedy knew, would be their undoing. Engines full, Kennedy whispered, gripping the throttle. Twin Packard engines roared, vibrating through the hull, propelling PT-109 toward the enemy with a Predator-esque patience. The moon reflected off the waves, offering both guidance and danger. Shadows danced across the water as the boat glided closer, every sound amplified in a tense silence. Ross adjusted the radar equipment, static hissing softly. Bearing 030, multiple contacts, looks like 2 destroyers in formation, smaller craft trailing behind. Kennedy nodded. Stay low, keep your profile minimal, wait for my signal. For nearly an hour, PT-109 tracked the convoy. The destroyers were imposing, bristling with guns, and each larger than PT-109 by multiples. Yet the PT boat's small size, speed, and maneuverability allowed it to weave through the waves, invisible to most observers on the decks of the enemy ships. The crew's training in stealth, honed months earlier in Rhode Island, was now being tested under real combat conditions. Suddenly, one of the Japanese ships illuminated the water with a searchlight, sweeping along the path where PT-109 had been lying in the shadows. The men froze. Heartbeats pounded in their chests. The light passed over them but did not catch their silhouette. The wooden hull absorbed the darkness, the PT boat's low profile hiding them like a ghost on the water. Kennedy signaled with a small hand gesture, ready the torpedoes. The crew moved with practiced precision, priming the Mark 8 torpedoes in the tubes. Every second mattered. Every misstep could result in the boat being destroyed before it could fire a single shot. The destroyers continued along their predictable course, unaware of the small Predator gliding silently toward them. 200 yards, Ross whispered. Target on your starboard. Kennedy leaned forward, gripping the wheel. Fire. The torpedo shot from the tube, slicing through the black water toward the lead destroyer. Moments stretched into eternity. Then a violent explosion erupted along the convoy. Water leapt high, Steel groaned, and the destroyer shuddered violently as fire raced across its deck. PT-109 recoiled from the shockwave, but remained intact, racing backward into the night before the enemy could bring their guns to bear. The crew erupted into elated shouts. He'd now pumped his fists. "We got them, we actually got them." Kennedy allowed himself a brief smile, but his eyes stayed on the horizon. Other destroyers were reacting, firing blindly into the night, but PT-109 vanished into darkness, engines screaming, silhouette indistinguishable from the shadows. The Japanese were stunned. How could a wooden boat, barely 80 feet long, wreak such havoc on a convoy of steel warships? Word would soon spread through the Imperial Navy that these Mosquito fleets were not toys, not nuisances, they were predators, fast and deadly. PT-109 circled silently, scanning for threats, ready for a second strike if necessary. The adrenaline of the attack had surged through every man on board, yet Kennedy maintained his composure. "Stay sharp," he said. "We not done." As the boat navigated the treacherous reefs of Guadalcanal, the crew discussed what had just happened in hushed, exhilarated tones. "Did you see their faces?" Hittner whispered. "They thought we were jokes." Ross chuckled softly. "Jokes with torpedoes, that's us." Kennedy nodded, still scanning the horizon. "This is only the beginning. We need to hit them hard and disappear before they regroup. That's how we win." In the darkness, PT-109 moved like a shadow over the water, weaving between reefs and avoiding detection, its wooden hull invisible to enemy radar. Each maneuver, each decision, was a testament to the training and preparation that had transformed a small, underestimated craft into a lethal weapon. By dawn, the Japanese convoy was in disarray. One destroyer heavily damaged, others forced to retreat, and the morale of the enemy shaken. The crew of PT-109 had proven what their critics had doubted: small, fast, audacious craft could alter the dynamics of naval warfare. The sun rose over Guadalcanal, casting gold across the Pacific. PT-109 returned to its forward base, crew exhausted but elated. Lieutenant Kennedy looked back at the shimmering waves, knowing that tonight had rewritten the rules of engagement. The Japanese had laughed at them, dismissed them, mocked them, and now they would have to rethink everything. PT boats, the Navy's tiny wooden Mosquitoes, had shown that they could be fatal. And the Pacific would never be the same. August 7th, 1942. Iron Bottom Sound, near Guadalcanal. The waters were eerily calm under the faint light of dawn, yet the men aboard PT boats knew better than to trust appearance. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy leaned against the railing of PT-109, binoculars trained on the horizon. A hum of twin Packard engines vibrated beneath his feet, a constant reminder of both speed and vulnerability. Around him, the small crew petty officer George Ross, Seaman Thomas Hittner, Seaman Leonard, and others moved quietly, each action deliberate, each sense alert to the slightest hint of enemy presence. The night's intelligence briefing had been grim. Japanese destroyers were actively patrolling the waters around Guadalcanal, escorting supply barges and troop transport. Previous encounters had proven that the PT boats' wooden hulls and small size were their greatest assets, allowing them to slip past detection. Yet the risks were enormous. One miscalculation, one misfired torpedo, and the tiny craft could be obliterated in seconds. Kennedy's gaze lingered on the faint glimmer of a destroyer S-lights in the distance. The enemy remained confident, perhaps arrogantly so, continuing to underestimate the so-called Mosquito fleet. Reports intercepted through intelligence had mocked PT boats as toys, unworthy of serious attention. But tonight, Kennedy intended to prove them catastrophically wrong. "Form up an attack line," Kennedy ordered, voice low but commanding. "Speed 20 knots, hold until I give the word." The crew obeyed, engines adjusting, the boat sliding silently across the glassy water. Each wave and ripple became a calculated variable, each shadow a potential threat or opportunity. As PT-109 crept closer to the enemy formation, the tension on board was palpable. Every creak of word, every whisper of wind, seemed amplified in the stillness. Ross adjusted the radar, scanning for additional contacts. 3 destroyers, approximately 5,000 yards ahead, 2 escorting smaller craft, he reported. Kennedy nodded, memorizing their positions. "We LL'd hit the lead destroyer first, fire and retreat, then circle back if possible. Precision is everything." As PT-109 closed in, the destroyers remained unaware of the tiny predator approaching. Wooden hulls, low profiles, and near silent engines rendered the boat nearly invisible. The Japanese, still underestimating the PT boat's threat, continued their patrols, confident in their superior firepower. 200 yards, Ross whispered. Kennedy's hands tightened on the wheel. He could feel the vibration of the engines beneath him, the anticipation coiling like a spring. "Fire," he commanded. The torpedo hissed through the water, cutting a straight path toward the destroyer S-hull. Seconds later, a violent explosion rocked the lead vessel, flames erupting along its deck. The other Japanese ships scrambled, firing blindly into the night, but PT-109 had already begun its evasive maneuver, engines screaming as it disappeared into the shadows. The crew erupted in exhilarated shouting, adrenaline surging. "Did you see that?" Hittner yelled. "We actually did it again." Kennedy allowed himself a small smile, but his eyes scanned for threats. The waters were now alive with the chaos of battle, smoke rising from the damaged destroyer, splashes from gunfire hitting the waves, and the frantic maneuvers of smaller enemy craft. The PT boat's speed and agility allowed it to navigate safely through the firefight, a ghost among the waves. Every movement reflected months of rigorous training, every decision a test of nerve and precision. The Japanese, who had mocked these mosquitoes, now faced the stark reality: small, fast, audacious craft could disrupt supply lines, damage destroyers, and alter the course of engagements. As the night wore on, PT-109 and other PT boats executed multiple strikes, each one reinforcing the lesson that audacity, speed, and stealth could equalize the imbalance of firepower. The Japanese were forced to rethink their strategy, moving cautiously and prospecting the threat they had previously dismissed. By dawn, the waters around Guadalcanal had shifted in favor of the Americans. Several enemy vessels were damaged or sunk, supply lines disrupted, and morale shaken. Kennedy and his crew returned to their forward base, exhausted but victorious. The night had proven beyond doubt that PT boats were not insignificant, nor were they toys to be laughed at. They were predators fast, lethal, and unpredictable. Kennedy surveyed the horizon, reflecting on the cost and the achievement. The Japanese had underestimated the power of small craft guided by determination, strategy, and precision. The Mosquito fleet had bitten, and the Pacific theater would never again regard these tiny vessels as mere nuisances. As PT-109 moored, the men began repairs and checked torpedoes, preparing for the next engagement. Every successful strike bolstered their confidence, yet each encounter reminded them of their vulnerability. The war in the Pacific was brutal, relentless, and unforgiving. But the PT boats had proven that courage, skill, and audacity could turn the tide even in the darkest, most uncertain nights. Kennedy leaned against the railing, looking out over the waters that would soon be scarred by history. The Japanese had laughed at them, mocked them, and dismissed them. Now they were beginning to fear the small, fast boats that had redefined naval warfare in the Solomons. August 2nd, 1943. Black waters off the Solomon Island. PT-109, its wooden hull slick under the night sky, cut silently through the pitch-dark waves. The twin Packard engines hummed like restless predators, their vibrations pulsing through the deck and into the bones of the 12-man crew. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy stood at the helm, eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon through binoculars. The Japanese had become cautious after repeated PT strikes, but caution could never eliminate unpredictability, and Kennedy intended to exploit every moment of it. The intelligence briefing had been grim. Japanese destroyers were patrolling aggressively, and the waters were crowded with supply barges, patrol boats, and mines. The night was calm, almost too calm, a deceptive quiet that carried the weight of imminent danger. Around Kennedy, his crew moved with practiced silence. Petty Officer George Ross adjusted radar dials, Seaman Hittner checked torpedo tubes, and Seaman Leonard scanned the darkness for flares or reflections. Every heartbeat was measured, every breath controlled. "Contact," Ross whispered, pointing toward a faint silhouette on the horizon. A destroyer, black against the Black Sea, plowed steadily through the water. Its size dwarfed PT-109, its guns bristling like jagged teeth. Yet the destroyer was predictable, adhering to its patrol path, unaware of the wooden predator approaching from the shadows. Kennedy nodded. "Steady, engines low. Keep your profile minimal. We move when we strike." The PT boat glided closer, each wave carrying the men toward both opportunity and death. Hours earlier, the Japanese had mocked the PT boats as inconsequential, toys incapable of threatening steel monsters. Now, those same steel monsters were unaware of the tiny, fast-moving craft that could strike and vanish in seconds. At 200 yards, Ross added with tension evident in his voice. Kennedy gripped the wheel. Steady. He could feel the boat trembling with anticipation. The night was electric, thick with tension. Then he gave the command, "Fire." The torpedo shot from the tube, slicing silently through the water. Seconds later, a violent explosion rocked the destroyer S-hull. Water erupted skyward, steel groaned, and fire blossomed across the enemy deck. PT-109 shuddered from the shockwave, but remained intact, engines screaming as it maneuvered to avoid return fire. A direct hit! Hittner shouted, voice cracking with exhilaration. Kennedy allowed himself a brief smile, eyes scanning the horizon. The destroyer, now crippled, began sending flares, alerting nearby Japanese ships. PT-109 had mere seconds before retaliation could arrive. The crew acted instinctively, executing evasive maneuvers drilled countless times during their training in Rhode Island. As the boat weaved between waves, the crew felt the thrill of victory tempered by the reality of danger. PT boats were lethal, but fragile. One mistake, one misjudgment, could turn triumph into catastrophe. The Japanese had laughed at them, but now they were forced to reckon with the force they had underestimated. Minutes later, PT-109 encountered another destroyer, part of the same convoy. The crew regrouped quickly, firing torpedoes with deadly precision. Another explosion rocked the night, flames leaping into the sky. The PT boat maneuvered expertly, disappearing into shadows, leaving chaos in its wake. But as the night wore on, the PT boat's vulnerability became apparent. PT-109 was struck by debris from near misses, minor hull damage, and a small fire on deck that Seaman Leonard quickly extinguished. The crew S-nerves were taut, adrenaline still coursing through their veins, every sense alive to the danger surrounding them. Kennedy took a moment to scan the horizon. "We've proven our point tonight," he said quietly. "The Japanese thought we were toys, but we've changed that. They'll think twice before underestimating any PT boat again." The Solomon's black water stretched endlessly, a mirror of the night sky. PT-109 cut through the waves like a shadow, wooden hull reflecting faint starlight. The crew knew the risks were far from over. Each engagement tested the limits of courage, skill, and audacity. Yet the night had solidified one undeniable truth. The PT boat's small size and speed, combined with daring and precision, could turn the tide of battle in the Pacific. As the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, Kennedy allowed himself a moment of reflection. The Japanese had mocked them, laughed at them, and dismissed them. Now, their laughter had been replaced by disbelief, confusion, and fear. The Mosquito fleet had proven its bite could be deadly, and history would remember that audacious strike in the dark waters of the Solomons. PT-109 returned to its base, hull bruised, crew exhausted, but morale soaring. The small wooden boat, once deemed inconsequential, had carved a path through enemy lines, sinking destroyers, disrupting supply routes, and proving that underestimation was a fatal error. Kennedy stood at the bow, watching the sun rise over Guadalcanal. Waves shimmered gold, reflecting a new reality. The Pacific War had shifted slightly in favor of the audacious, and the tiny PT boats had played a pivotal role. They had laughed last, but it was the Japanese who now understood the lethal force hidden in small, wooden hulls, powered by engines, courage, and human will. The crew disembarked silently, checking equipment, repairing minor damage, and readying themselves for the next engagement. Every man aboard knew that while victory was achieved tonight, the war was far from over. PT boats would continue to test enemy assumptions, strike unpredictably, and prove that size and firepower alone did not determine the outcome of battle. Kennedy leaned back, exhaustion tempered by satisfaction. "Men," he said softly, "tonight we've shown what we're capable of. Small boats, yes, but mighty in spirit. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." The crew nodded, understanding the weight of those words. In the Pacific, audacity mattered more than armor. And PT-109 had just rewritten the rules of engagement. August 3rd, 1943. Rubble, New Britain. The air was thick with tension, smoke, and the scent of diesel from shit stocked in the harbor. Japanese naval officers paced briskly along the steel decks, reports in hand, their brows furrowed with growing frustration. Intercepted communications from Guadalcanal were grim, destroyers damaged, supply runs disrupted, and small, with an American PT boats appearing where they were least expected. The so-called Mosquito fleet, once mocked as trivial, were proving to be a lethal nuisance. Rear Admiral Gunishi Mikawa, a stern figure known for his decisive leadership, stood at the center of a briefing room. Maps of the Solomon Islands spread before him. He glanced at the reports, each detailing encounters with PT boats so small they seemed harmless, yet capable of sinking destroyers with precision strikes. "This is unacceptable," McCall said, voice low but sharp. "They are too fast, too elusive. Our destroyers cannot respond in time. We must change tactics immediately." Captain Shoji Nishimura, his second in command, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, these PT boats, we initially dismissed them. We laughed. We thought them useless, but they are deadly." McCall's eyes narrowed. "Underestimation is our greatest failure. We must assume every small vessel is a threat. Our supply lines, our patrols, nothing is safe from these mosquitoes." Across the harbor, Japanese sailors exchanged worried glances. Stories from Guadalcanal had spread quickly, each tale more extraordinary than the last. PT-109 and other PT boats were no longer considered nuisances. they had become a nightmare ghost fleet that struck with speed, stealth, and precision. Meanwhile, in the Solomons, Kennedy and his crew prepared for another night mission. PT-109S hull bore minor scars from the previous engagement, but the engines purred reliably. The crew moved with quiet determination, their confidence tempered by the reality of combat. Every man knew that the Japanese were now aware of their presence, their audacity, and their capabilities. "Looks like word travels fast," Ross said, adjusting the radar. "Levy started to take us seriously." Kennedy nodded. "Good, that fear will slow them down, and slow enemies are easier to hit." As PT-109 navigated the waters under the cover of night, the crew reflected on the rapid transformation of their reputation. From toys to terror, their wooden boat had written the narrative in the Pacific. Japanese destroyers now patrolled cautiously, their movements constrained by the knowledge that one wrong approach could result in catastrophe. The PT boat's agility and speed had created an asymmetric advantage. One wooden hull, armed with torpedoes, could strike massive ships and vanish before retaliation. Japanese officers, once scornful, now had to account for every shadow, every ripple, and every glint of light across the waves. In Rabaul, McCall convened further strategy sessions, emphasizing the need for tighter coordination, increased reconnaissance, and protective measures against PT boat attacks. The enemy had learned a painful lesson: the smallest vessel could deliver the deadliest blow. Back aboard PT-109, Kennedy steered the boat carefully through narrow channels and around coral reefs. The Solomons were a labyrinth of danger, yet the men had grown adept at exploiting it. Their knowledge of currents, tides, and hidden coves gave them an edge the Japanese could not anticipate. Hitler glanced over the side of the boat, water churning softly beneath them. "They laughed at us, sir. Now they're scared of a mosquito." Kennedy allowed a small smile, eyes still scanning the horizon. "Fear is a weapon, and we wield it well." The PT boat cut through the night like a phantom, engines whispering, torpedoes armed and ready. Each strike, each successful mission, reinforced the lesson learned by both sides in the Pacific theater: audacity and cunning could outweigh size and firepower. By dawn, PT-109 returned safely to its base. The crew disembarked, bruised and tired, yet their spirits soared. Intelligence reports would be compiled, victories recorded, and the Japanese would continue to recalibrate their strategies, wary of these small wooden boats. Kennedy looked out over the water, reflecting on the rapid evolution of the PT fleet's reputation. The Japanese had laughed at them, mocked them, and dismissed them. Now, the fear was real. The Mosquito fleet had transformed into a symbol of unexpected lethality, a testament to strategy, skill, and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. The war in the Pacific was far from over, but one undeniable truth had emerged: underestimation could be fatal, and even the smallest vessel, guided by audacity and precision, could change the course of battle. August 3rd, 4th, 1943. Black water surrounding the Solomon Islands. The night had settled over the Pacific like a velvet cloak, quiet yet brimming with latent danger. PT-109, its wooden hull slick with salt water, moved like a shadow across the waves. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy stood at the helm, binoculars scanning for faint silhouettes, listening intently to the soft hum of the twin Packard engines beneath his feet. Every ripple of the ocean carried a story, every wave could conceal a destroyer, a patrol craft, or a hidden mine. A crew of 12 had been on alert for hours, their senses honed by months of patrolling the Solomons. Petty Officer George Ross adjusted radar dials, eyes flicking between readings and the night horizon. Seaman Thomas Hittner gripped the deck railing, prepared for sudden maneuvers. Seaman Leonard monitored the engine vibrations, translating the rhythm into intuition about the boat's capabilities. The men were exhausted, but training and adrenaline sharpened their awareness. Earlier intelligence had suggested Japanese destroyers were moving along predictable routes to reinforce Guadalcanal. The small PT boats, dismissed as inconsequential and fragile, had already proven capable of striking lethal blows. One miscalculation could result in disaster, one perfect strike could cripple an enemy ship. Kennedy understood this balance acutely. 2 contacts off the starboard bow, Ross whispered. Destroyers, moving slowly, about 3,000 yards. Kennedy nodded. Maintain course, engines quiet. We wait for the right moment. Minutes stretched into hours as the PT boat closed silently on the enemy. The destroyers were unaware of the predator moving toward them. Wooden hulls, low profiles, and near silent engines rendered PT-109 almost invisible. The Japanese, who had previously mocked the PT fleet, now faced the reality that these mosquitoes were deadly hunters, capable of striking unexpectedly and vanishing before retaliation. Kennedy's mind raced through the tactics drilled in Rhode Island: approach, fire, and retreat. Every movement, every decision had to be precise. A single misstep could doom the boat and crew. "Hold steady," he murmured. The boat shuddered under the tension, the ocean vibrating beneath its hull like a cold spring. Suddenly, the lead destroyer altered course, perhaps sensing danger. Kennedy's eyes narrowed. "Adjust heading, port 5 degrees, prepare torpedoes." The crew moved with practiced precision, priming the Mark 8 torpedoes. The boat slowed, hugging the shadows. Seconds became an eternity. Fire. Kennedy's voice was calm but resolute. The torpedoes shot from the tube, causing a silent path through the black water. Moments later, the explosion rocked the destroyer. Flames leapt into the night sky, water erupted, and PT-109 felt the recoil of its strike. The other destroyer scrambled, firing blindly, but PT-109 had already begun evasive maneuvers, slipping like a ghost through the waves. The crew erupted in exhilarated shouts, adrenaline surging through every vein. Hitler pumped his fists. "We did it! We actually did it!" Kennedy allowed himself a brief smile, but his eyes remained vigilant. The destroyer was crippled, yet the threat of counterattack remained. The PT boat's small size and speed were their only protection against the overwhelming firepower of the enemy. Hours later, after multiple engagements, PT-109 returned to its forward base. The crew, exhausted but triumphant, began cataloguing damage, checking torpedoes, and repairing minor hull breaches. The night had solidified their reputation among the Japanese, and among their own forces. PT boats were not toys, nor were they trivial. They were symbols of audacity, precision, and lethal capability. Kennedy addressed his crew quietly. "Men, tonight we've shown what we're capable of. The Japanese laughed at us, dismissed us, thought us insignificant. Now they know the truth. Small boats, yes, but mighty in spirit. Remember that." As the sun rose over Guadalcanal, reflecting gold and orange across the Pacific, the legend of PT-109 was born. Stories of the daring strikes, the courage of the crew, and the audacity of a small wooden boat capable of sinking massive destroyers spread through naval intelligence channels. The Japanese, who had once scorned these vessels, now respected them and feared them. The crew disembarked, weary but proud. Each man carried with him the knowledge that their actions had changed perceptions, altered strategy, and demonstrated the power of courage, skill, and audacity over size and brute force. PT-109 had become more than a boat. It was a symbol of the unexpected, the underestimated, and the audacious. Kennedy stood at the bow one last time, gazing out over the shimmering waters. The Japanese had laughed. The Pacific had doubted. But history, he knew, remembered those who dared to defy expectations. PT-109's bite had been felt, and the legend would endure. August 4th, 1943. The waters off Kilimanjaro, Solomon Islands. The Pacific was deceptively serene, the moonlight spilling over glassy waves, masking danger below. PT-109 lay in wait, its wooden hull barely disturbing the surface as the twin Packard engines hummed like restrained predators. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy stood at the helm, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the faint silhouettes of Japanese barges and destroyers. The air was thick with humidity, the smell of salt, diesel, and wood resin mingling in the darkness. The crew of 12 had grown accustomed to this rhythm long nights. Deadly silence, constant vigilance, but each engagement carried an unspoken truth. Victory exacted a human cost. Every patrol could mean death, injury, or the psychological toll of near misses. The small PT boats, capable of incredible feats, were fragile. One miscalculation could leave the crew stranded in shark-infested waters or facing overwhelming enemy fire. Kennedy's mind drifted briefly to the men who had trained with him back in Rhode Island, the young sailors learning to trust a wooden hull over steel. He knew courage alone could not shield them from bullets, torpedoes, or glancing explosion. Every victory was hard won, and every success carried the shadow of potential loss. "Look alive," Kennedy whispered, voice taut with focus. 2 destroyers at 3,000 yards, flanking a supply barge. Petty Officer Ross adjusted the radar, translating pings into actionable coordinates. Seaman Hittner checked the torpedo tubes, the metallic clink echoing faintly over the deck. Each man moved with calm efficiency, yet beneath the professionalism lurked tension, the knowledge that the smallest mistake could be fatal. As PT-109 closed on the target, the destroyers remained oblivious. Their confidence in superior firepower had blinded them to the threat of these tiny, fast boats. The Japanese had once laughed, calling them Mosquito fleets. That laughter was now replaced by uncertainty, caution, and fear. Kennedy leaned over the wheel, eyes narrowing. "Prepare torpedoes, engines quiet. Approach from the starboard bow. We strike and vanish." The crew obeyed, movements synchronized from countless drills. The boat slid forward like a shadow, engines muted, hull low against the waves. Minutes became eternity as the men waited for the perfect moment. The torpedo tubes were primed, and the crew's collective heartbeat seemed to echo in the silence of the night. 200 yards, Ross whispered, tension tightening his voice. Kennedy's grip on the throttle tightened. Fire. The torpedo shot from the tube, cutting silently through the black water. Seconds later, the destroyer shuddered violently as an explosion ripped through its hull. Flames erupted, scattering debris across the waves. PT-109 shuddered from the force but remained intact, slipping into the shadows before the enemy could retaliate. The crew erupted in exhilarated shouts, yet Kennedy's focus remained unbroken. Every successful strike reminded him of the risks endured by his men, the hours of tension, the near-death encounters, and the constant threat that the ocean could become a tomb. PT boats were deadly, yes, but they were also mortal vessels, subject to the cruelty of the Pacific theater. In the aftermath, Kennedy ordered a sweep of the nearby waters. Debris from the attack floated silently, a grim reminder that the war was indiscriminate. PT-109's victories came at the price of fear, fatigue, and the knowledge that death lurked beneath the calm surface. The men had survived tonight, but survival was never guaranteed. As dawn broke over the Solomons, the crew returned to base, exhausted yet resolute. They began repairs, checked torpedoes, and catalogued the night's events. The Pacific War was unforgiving, and each engagement carried a human cost invisible in reports and dispatches. PT-109's legend was growing, but so too was the weight of responsibility, the burden of keeping 12 men alive while striking fear into the enemy. Kennedy stood at the bow, watching the sunrise casting golden light over the waves. He knew that courage and skill had preserved lives tonight, but that luck, preparation, and the ocean's favor had also played crucial roles. The Japanese had laughed at these small, wooden boats, but the laughter was gone. Fear had replaced it, and the cost of victory was measured not only in enemy ships sunk, but in the fragile, mortal bodies aboard the PT boats themselves. Men, Kennedy said quietly, addressing his exhausted crew, we've done what no one expected. But remember, every mission is a balance between courage and caution. Every success carries weight. Keep your heads, trust your training, and WLL continue to win. But never forget the cost. The crew nodded, understanding both the thrill of victory and the shadow that followed it. PT-109, small and wooden, had become a symbol of audacity and effectiveness, but it had also become a crucible, testing the limits of endurance, bravery, and human resilience in the relentless Pacific theater. August 10th, 1943. The Solomon Islands, waters near Columbangar. The sea lay flat under, sky streaked with the faint glow of dawn. PT-109, patched and polished after weeks of engagements, hummed softly as the twin Packard engines warmed. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy stood at the helm, eyes scanning the horizon. His crew moved quietly across the deck, checking torpedo tubes, radar equipment, and fuel lines. Though small and wooden, PT-109 had become a vessel of myth among both American and Japanese forces, a symbol of audacity, speed, and lethal precision. The recent successes of PT boats had begun to shift the strategic calculus in the Pacific. Intelligence reports noted disrupted supply lines, crippled destroyers, and the growing anxiety among Japanese commanders. These Mosquito fleets, once dismissed as toys, were forcing the Japanese to rethink deployment strategies, patrol patterns, and defensive postures. Where destroyers had previously moved with confidence, now they navigated cautiously, wary of a wooden silhouette in the night. Kennedy reflected on the evolution of his squadron. Months ago, in Rhode Island, the PT boats had been little more than training exercises and theoretical exercises in naval strategy. Now they were proving themselves in the harshest crucible imaginable, real combat in the Pacific. The crew had learned that size did not guarantee safety, that surprise could outweigh brute strength, and that audacity could redefine naval warfare. "Sir," Petty Officer Ross said, pointing toward the faint outline of a distant barge, "looks like supply traffic, minimal escort." Kennedy nodded. "Good. WLL take a calculated strike. We move fast, hit, and vanish. Keep your profiles low." The PT boat glided forward, wooden hull cutting through the water with near invisibility. Hours of patrolling had honed the crew's instincts. Every wave, every shadow, every reflection could be a clue or a trap. They approached the target silently, engines throttled back, ready to unleash torpedoes at a precise distance. The first torpedo shot from PT-109's tube, running straight and true. A violent explosion ripped through the barge's hull, water spraying high into the dawn sky. The crew cheered silently, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Yet Kennedy maintained his focus, eyes scanning for other potential threats. The Japanese had learned to fear these small boats, but fear could also make an enemy predictable, vulnerable to precisely such attacks. "Excellent strike," Hetner whispered, adjusting his stance as the boat maneuvered to avoid detection. Kennedy allowed a faint smile. One more sweep, then back to base. We've made our point. By mid-morning, PT-109 returned to the forward operating base. The crew disembarked, exhausted but elated. The strategic impact of their actions was evident. Japanese supply lines were disrupted, morale shaken, and the perception of PT boats irrevocably changed. The Mosquito fleet had become a weapon that balanced audacity, skill, and strategy against superior firepower. Back in Japanese command posts, officers pored over reports detailing PT boat successes. Destroyers had been damaged, supply missions delayed, and Japanese morale faltering. They had laughed at these wooden boats once. Now, the enemy feared them. Rear Admiral McCullough convened a council, emphasizing the need to adapt, to anticipate, and to respect the capabilities of vessels previously considered inconsequential. Kennedy and his crew, meanwhile, prepared for another night mission. Each patrol was calculated risk, but the rewards were tangible: strategic disruption, psychological impact, and the enduring lesson that courage, preparation, and precision could outmatch raw firepower. The crew had internalized the critical truth of naval combat: underestimation was fatal. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the Pacific. PT-109, small and wooden yet mighty in spirit, prepared to once again slip through the darkness. Lieutenant Kennedy stood at the helm, watching the Japanese vessels in the distance, and felt the quiet satisfaction of having transformed a once dismissed craft into a strategic asset. The legend of PT-109 and its sister boat spread among Allied forces, inspiring crews to embrace audacity and skill. In the Pacific theater, the balance of power had shifted slightly in favor of those willing to take risks, strike unpredictably, and exploit their enemy's arrogance. The Japanese had mocked the PT boats, and in doing so, had underestimated the capacity for a small wooden vessel to alter the course of naval engagement. As night fell over the Solomons, PT-109 slipped into the darkness like a shadow once more. The crew, seasoned and alert, understood their place in the ongoing war. Each strike reinforced the lesson learned time and again in the vastness of the Pacific. The smallest predator could change the rules of engagement. August 15th, 1943. Tulagi Harbor, Solomon Islands. The sun rose slowly over the Pacific, turning the water into a mirror of gold and crimson. PT-109 bobbed gently at its mooring, engine silent, hull scarred by battles fought and survived. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy leaned against the bow, binoculars lowered, the weight of recent nights settling into his shoulders. Around him, the crew moved with the quiet efficiency of men tempered by experience, checking equipment, repairing hull damage, cataloguing torpedoes, and preparing for the next mission. The past months had transformed not only the crew but the very perception of PT boats across the Pacific. Initially mocked as fragile, inconsequential vessels, they had proven capable of altering the course of engagements, disrupting enemy supply lines, and inflicting damage that far exceeded their size. Small wooden hulls, high-speed engines, and audacious tactics had turned the tide in favor of the underdog. Kennedy's thoughts drifted to the men of his crew, their courage, their endurance, and their willingness to embrace danger with a clarity of purpose few could comprehend. Each engagement carried risk, the threat of enemy fire, the chance of capsizing, or worse, but the crew had risen repeatedly to the challenge. Their victories had not come from brute force but from discipline, strategy, and audacity. "Lieutenant," Ross said softly, breaking Kennedy's reverie, "you think the Japanese are really afraid of us now?" Kennedy nodded. "They should be. We've shown them that size isn't everything. Confidence, preparation, and courage matter too. They allow respect PT boats now, maybe even fear them." Hitler approached, cleaning a torpedo tube. "It is hard to believe we've done all that with wooden boats, isn't it?" Kennedy allowed himself a small smile. "History often remembers the audacious, and we've been audacious every step of the way." Word of PT-109's action spread quickly through the Allied command. Reports detailed daring night attacks, successful torpedo strikes, and the disruption of Japanese supply lines. These small boats became symbols of ingenuity and courage, proving that even the humblest vessel could wield disproportionate influence on the battlefield. For the Japanese, the lesson was brutal and humbling. What they had once considered a minor nuisance, say Mosquito fleet, had grown into a nightmare. Destroyers and supply lines now required constant vigilance, altering strategy and forcing commanders to allocate resources to counter threats they had previously dismissed. Laughter had been replaced by fear, and underestimation had proven costly. Back aboard PT-109, Kennedy prepared the crew for another patrol, the sun dipping toward the horizon. Each mission remained perilous, yet each strike reinforced the lessons learned. Audacity, precision, and courage could outweigh size and firepower. The wooden hulls carried not just weapons but the weight of expectation, the hope of victory, and the embodiment of skill and daring. The legend of PT-109 would endure beyond the immediate battles. Stories of the crew's bravery and the audacity of a small, seemingly insignificant vessel inspired generations of sailors and officers. The lessons of stealth, speed, and unpredictability would be studied, admired, and emulated for decades. Kennedy gazed out over the calm waters, reflecting on the journey from Rhode Island training exercises to the shadowy engagements of the Solomons. The Japanese had mocked them, laughed at the small fleet, and dismissed them as trivial. But through courage, skill, and audacity, PT-109 had left an indelible mark on naval history. "Men," Kennedy said quietly, addressing his crew, "what we've done matters, not just in the battles we fight, but in proving what is possible. Never let anyone underestimate you, not your enemies, not the world. Remember that." The crew nodded, understanding the weight of those words. They had survived nights of terror, struck fear into the enemy, and redefined the capabilities of a tiny wooden boat. Their courage had created a legacy that would outlast the war itself. As twilight descended on the Solomon Islands, PT-109 cut through the waves once more, a shadow among shadows. The engines hummed steadily, the crew alert and resolute. The Pacific, vast and unpredictable, remained a theatre of danger but also of opportunity. And in that theatre, the smallest, most audacious vessels could leave the deepest mark. The Japanese had laughed. PT-109 had bitten. And the world would never forget.